Hey my friend, welcome back to the Stretch Game. I hope your week is going well. This week we are on Essays of Effectiveness and we're looking at cultural icons, and after a week's worth of intensive research, I'm finding out what is the number one thing that makes this icon so effective. And then we're taking that knowledge. My goal is to take that knowledge for you and figure out how we can apply that to our own lives with really simple tools and strategies, maybe in 3 or 4 different principles that really help you to apply it. So this week we're talking about Bear Grylls, and this guy's a crazy guy, and I was first introduced to him during Running Wild with Bear Grylls. And after I saw this guy and just some of the crazy and courageous things that he did, I had to go through all of his stuff. So I think I've seen every episode of Man vs. Wild, and I've seen lots of other things he's done. But we're going to take a look at this guy, and we're going to try to figure out, with this crazy character, what is the number one thing that makes him so effective. And I think I've got that figured out. The number one thing that I think makes him effective is the very reason why I carry around this pocket knife. And most of the time when I'm wearing blue jeans, I carry this knife. It has the BG emblem on it. And whenever I get caught up and I feel ineffective for a very specific reason, I'll take a look at this knife, and it just reminds me some of the craziness that he has gone through and put himself through, and that he's gotten through it. So that'll make more sense as we get into the episode. So this is Essays on Effectiveness, Bear Grylls. Stay tuned. All right, this is Essays on Effectiveness, Bear Grylls. Most people know Bear Grylls for the urine drinking, poop eating type of guy that went viral in a lot of videos from Man vs. Wild. And the truth is, there's a lot more to Bear Grylls than that, and he achieved a lot before these episodes, these shows ever came out. One of the things that he achieved at a young age was, right out of private school, he signed on to the British Secret Service, the SAS. And if you don't know what that is, here in the US, we would liken that to being a Navy SEAL. It's really the highest rank that you can achieve in the British military. And so he went through this rigorous qualifying with 180 men, and only 4 men made it. He was one of the 4. And so they're on a mission that he talks about in his book. You don't know a lot about it, probably because it's confidential, but they're parachuting over an area with some cargo. And so he jumps out of the plane. He's the last one to jump out of the plane, and at 3,000 feet, he pulls his ripcord, and this is old hat to him. He's done it 1,000 times, but he noticed from the sound there was a snap and that something was wrong. He pulled the ripcord, he looked up, and he saw bad news, that his chute had literally split right down the center. And so he was falling extremely fast. He cut away that chute, he opened his other chute, but his velocity was already too high. He hit the ground with a crazy impact, breaking his back in 3 places. Now, he was in British military recovery for a year and a half and went through being in the cast, went through not knowing if he was ever going to walk again, and not knowing even after that at what he was going to be able to function, at what quality he was going to be able to function. Now, in Running Wild with the Bear Grylls, in an episode of that, you see him getting ready to jump out of a plane, and he talks about how scary it is for him to jump out, and he just counts down and jumps out of that plane without thinking about it too much, because he has so much fear of jumping out of the plane because of what happened, but he just gets it done. you would see the same pattern throughout Bear Grylls' career. He joined a reality show, and this is what really got him to be well known by people, and it was called Escape to the Legion, and it was about the French Foreign Legion. The French Foreign Legion is considered the worst and most grueling military and boot camp ever, and it's because if you had committed a crime in another country, if you joined the French Foreign Legion, and if you served for, I believe it was 4 years, they would expunge your record. So I mean, they got some of the worst, and the boot camp was absolutely grueling. Well, Bear Grylls does a reality show called Escape to the Legion, and it's 6 weeks with 12 men going through a French Foreign Legion boot camp. And the show is insanely brutal. And these men that went into it, many of them had very challenging lives, very challenging backgrounds, and they wanted to get back on the right foot, and Bear Grylls was going to use this as a platform to help them to do that. Well, this was so difficult that half of the men dropped out. 6 of the 12 did not make it to the end. And many times Bear Grylls was trying to help them through at his own expense. In fact, there was one time when one of the guys didn't have enough food to eat. And so Bear Grylls was going to give him his portion, which is a strict no, you don't do that. And one of the men saw this. And so he made Bear Grylls go out, dig his own grave in 115, 120 degree Fahrenheit weather, get in the grave, and then collapse it in on himself. And he was buried up to his neck and had to stay in the sun out there all day. In fact, they even made the guys use his head as one of the boundaries while they played a game of soccer. You can't make this stuff up. So he did this for his comrades, and 6 of them ended up making it to the end of this 6-week boot camp. Again, 12 men went in, 6 came out. He also ended up being the youngest man to ever climb Mount Everest. And again, this is all before Running Wild with Bear Grylls or Man vs. Wild. At 23 years old, he was part of an expedition that made it to the top of Everest, making him the youngest man to ever climb Mount Everest. And then finally, this is probably more along the lines of the Bear Grylls that you know of today. He is on an episode of Man vs. Wild. He's in the middle of the Sahara Desert. He's been dropped off with really nothing, and he finds a camel that has just died. And he uses every part of this camel. You know, he drinks from the hump of this camel, the water that's there. He takes the food that's been partially digested, and he squeezes that out and drinks it. I think he maybe even eats part of the liver of the camel. He hollows the thing out, he cuts off the skin, and he uses the fur for warmth, and he gets inside the camel's hollowed out carcass in order to shelter himself from dust storms and to protect him from the cold of the night, and ends up spending the night in this hollowed out carcass. Now, there's a lot of things that make Bear Grylls effective, but the number one thing that I believe makes him effective is that he does not let fear grip him, okay? He does not let fear take control. And in my own life, there are many times when I'm afraid. Like right before shooting this video, I was on Facebook Live and I shot a live video. 15 minutes before that, I had said I'm going live in 15. And I was like, why did I do that? Now I have to shoot this video. And so I have all these times in my life where I have anxiety or I'm afraid to do something, especially if it's a big achievement, and I have to push myself through. And I feel like Bear Grylls, he does this to a great degree. And I think there's really a couple of reasons. And this is where we get into the tools and strategy. This is how you can really apply this to your own life. Number one, when you come across that thing that you want to accomplish and you're afraid, you really need to allot a specific amount of time to the planning. I was watching an episode of The Apprentice, and it was an older episode, and in this episode there was 2 teams, and they had to create an ice cream flavor, and then they had to go sell it. And it was showing what the 2 teams were doing parallel, side by side. And the reason they did this, I think, it really proved a good point and taught a good lesson. The first group, the project manager said, you've got 5 minutes, come up with as many flavors as you want. We're going to pick the best one in 5 minutes and we're going to go. And then they took off running. Conversely, if you look at the other group, they had this big whiteboard. They started coming up with different flavors, and literally this went on for like an hour. By the time they actually picked a flavor, the other team was practically done with the task and getting ready to sell the ice cream. Now, what happens whenever you give yourself too much time and too many options is you get hit with analysis paralysis. And this other team, they could not decide what their flavor was going to be. And then even after they did, they really second guessed it out of fear that they had made the wrong decision. So with any task you want to accomplish, you've really got to determine ahead of time, how much time am I going to spend on the planning so I can get busy, so I can get moving. The next thing, and this really is a close second, is that you don't want to give yourself too many options with a task. And there's a really good parable of a donkey who is 10 feet from water over here and 10 feet from food over here, and he ends up dying because he can't decide which one he's going to go over to. The second thing you want to do is, if it's something that you're afraid to do or something that you have a little bit of anxiety about trying to accomplish, is that you want to spend more time on the ultimate vision than you do of the actual planning. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, fear is kind of like a black hole, and if you try to pull fear out, gravity is always going to try to pull it back in. Something has to replace fear. What can replace fear is your ultimate vision, or the most colorful vision of what it will look like, what the ultimate outcome is when you accomplish a task. Then when you make that really compelling in your own mind, you can replace fear with it, and focus on it rather than fear. So you really want to be clear, what is your ultimate vision? If everything happened exactly how you wanted it to, what exactly would that ultimate vision look like? What are things going to look like? What's it going to feel like? Give yourself that ultimate vision so you can focus on that rather than your fears. And then finally, if fear has caused you to get stuck and you're in analysis paralysis and you feel like you can't move forward, lower your expectations. And you're probably not expecting to hear that, but it's really interesting because in the 70s and 80s, IBM was the juggernaut of computers. That's why Steve Jobs hated them so much, because they really owned the market, they really owned the industry. Now you would think that if this is IBM, their sales force is going to have the highest goals, highest quotas in sales of any of the companies. But it was actually quite the opposite. IBM had the lowest sales quotas of any of its competitors. And what's really interesting about that is their salesmen didn't have fear that they weren't going to reach their quotas, which could paralyze them. So when they reached these really easy quotas, in their own minds, they felt like they had achieved something because they had, and they felt like the rest was bonus. And so they would skyrocket past these quotas, whereas in other companies with high quotas, if you weren't going to make the quota, you'd get really discouraged and the fear might cause you to stop. So if you lower your expectations, just take that first action that you need to take, the simple, easy action. That can get you unstuck, that can give you forward motion, help you to shake off the fear, and help you to move forward. So those are really the principles. I hope you've enjoyed this. Don't forget to check out the blueprint. Whatever you do this week, do two things with it, my friend. Be both purposeful and productive. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you next week. Did you like this video? Would you like to make it a part of your daily life? If so, go to thestretchgame.com and download the blueprint. There you'll really get the meat of what was discussed today, because I throw a lot of content at you all at once. But more importantly, you will get your 7-day challenge. Now, this is the part that makes you a doer, not just a hearer. It allows you to really apply what you've learned to your life and be able to grow, be able to discover deeper purpose and master higher productivity. Also, if you'd like to know what it means to be and become a Christian, you can click Faith and it will take you through a course where you can learn just that. Take care, my friends.